beginning. All right, from the Fairfax City, we're very grateful that Ralf Dörper and Miguel Mertens accepted our invitation to our show. Hey, guys, welcome to my humble podcast, man.
Hello, Claudia.
Hey, thank you for calling.
Thank you for the invite.
No problem. Let's go back to the beginning before we talk about propaganda. Were any of you born like in a musical family? I mean, how old were you when you perhaps began taking, I don't know, guitar lesson or piano lesson back in the day?
I was not born in a musical family. I mean, my father played flugelhorn when he was a kid, but not professionally or something, And my first instrument when I think it was in Grundschule, in the first 4 years of school, we got introduced to various instruments. One day, somebody from our class came in with an accordion and played some accordion music. And then I picked up accordion. So I wanted to play accordion. I did that for a couple of years as a kid, but I didn't continue. And I started to go back into music actually rather late, when I was 17. My original plan was to become a vibraphone player, and I wanted to go towards the jazz music, And when I went to Berlin and got a teacher, and I was learning piano and vibraphone, and then eventually I was applying for the music school in Berlin, for the official state University of Music. And there I realized I can't study vibraphone as such. I had to study the entire classical percussion instrumentarium. And so I did that. I studied classical music and, for many years in Berlin and then later in Düsseldorf. And that led to my position at the Düsseldorf Symphonic Orchestra, where I worked as a percussionist for something like 6 years, yeah.
And I'm coming from a totally different direction, because I was not playing any instrument during my teens. I was just consuming music, but I got more involved into music when the punk scene happened. That was at the end of the 70s in Düsseldorf. And actually, I started doing music, that means recording music, not before there were some electronic instruments available that you could afford. So the big inspiration was one record that was the normal Warm Leatherette, Daniel Miller, and also the availability of some musical instruments, mostly from Japan, that you could afford. And that's when I started actually to make some records, electronic music records. Nowadays, you might call them experimental, or sometimes you might call them electropunk. And that was around 1980. I had my first single release.
Got it. I'm surprised Michael mentioned Berlin, man. Berlin being the capital of electronic music in the world. There are so many great bands. I mean, I have interviewed, of course, many people for Tangerine Dream, the Klaus Schulze, the Peter Baumann, the Manuel Gosch, and so on and so forth. I'm always surprised why, the word punk, electropunk, but electronic music is Germany, which especially in Berlin, right? In any street in Berlin, people were playing keyboards. But
in Düsseldorf as well,
as well, right?
City of Kraftwerk.
Yeah. Of course.
So Düsseldorf was very much filled with electronic sounds as well. But there was a bit of a gap because Kraftwerk were more or less being secret in the studio, whereas the people in Berlin, they had open spaces jamming around. So there had been core bands like Tangerine Dream, and then people who used to be in Tangerine Dream formed own bands and so on. This we didn't have in Düsseldorf.
I see. How did the two of you end the meeting to begin with?
How we met? Oh,
yeah. Yeah, that's pretty.
That's funny story.
Yeah, that's funny. First of all, if you look at the very beginning of Propaganda, that was in summer 1982. I started Propaganda with a friend that I've met from Cologne, and we decided to do electronic music, very much sequenced music, but we wanted not to feature a male voice, because there were bands with male voices like DAF, Deutsch-Amerikanische Freundschaft around, or Die Krupps. We were thinking about doing something similar, but with a female voice. And there we made a recording, actually, already in summer 1982. And that recording we did with the intention to have later on a record out. And the vocals on this recording were done by Susanne Freytag. We invited her to do the vocals. And then we had a tape of the songs we had done and went to London to go, as you would say, label shopping or to present it. And at that time, it really was more a project, or you could really say an underground idea. And funnily enough, there was a connection made by a music journalist who knew me and my work, and he actually mentioned to us there is a guy, Paul Morley, who was a journalist at that time. He wanted to leave the paper, the New Musical Express, to found a label with Trevor Horn. And that was the initial point where we actually, as Propaganda, got in touch with these later on ZTT people. So when we came back to Germany, we were thinking, well, that could be interesting, but for Trevor Horn, our music would be too much too, let's say, punky, simple, not very much elaborate. And then there was a fate or an accident, a chance meeting, and the chance meeting was with Michael. Because I had, in Düsseldorf, I didn't have any money. So I had basic instruments, and one of these tools was a very simple sequencer. And the sequencer was part of a unit which also included a drum machine, which I didn't have. And then I saw at that time there was no internet, so you had advertisements, private advertisements made in papers. Somebody who actually wanted to sell this rhythm machine that I needed. And this somebody was actually Michael. I got in touch, I phoned him up, I visited him, and when I met him at his flat, I saw he had a lot of musical instruments. He had classical instruments like marimba and wipes, but he also had electronical instruments like a big Oberheim. So we got talking, and that was the very beginning. Because then I thought it would be great if he could help as a trained musician, because for Trevor Horn, we really had to make something special. And that was the moment we actually developed the idea to make the song Dr. Mabuse, because I thought with expertise of Michael, with dramatic soundtrack pictures, he could do with arrangements. He could work with us for Dr. Mabuse, and that was a song we wanted then to present Trevor Horn. And we were lucky because he liked it. And in the end, a year later, we got actually this contract with ZTT. And the first release was once again a year later in 84. So, but it all started in 82.
I got it. Wow. Dr. Mabuse, man, that's an unbelievable track. Oh, man. Of course, I love all of them, but I didn't know that was the first one. Oh, that's great. And then at the time, I don't know if Claudia was married to Paul at the time. No, right. No, later on she married him, right?
Very much later on. It was later on, yeah.
Because she ended up living in London, so it's a lot easier for her in 85 to say, but all of you were in Germany, right? No internet, no phone. It was expensive to, go back and forth to the studio. So you couldn't go.
The thing was, for example, Claudia at that time, she was still at school.
I got it. Yep.
she hadn't finished school, so she had to stay more or less in school to finish the education. And in the very beginning, it was not clear what it would mean for us, because all the people involved, maybe I was the only one who had records out before and had any contact with record companies. But record company in Germany at that time was totally different from England. So it was for us a total unclear scenario, what would happen, how a studio works, but later on how a record company works with pushing records and stuff like that. We didn't really know what to expect. And especially with a recording contract, we also didn't really know what it means. We just wanted to make a record with Trevor Horn, because Trevor Horn, we knew from his work with, for example, ABC, Malcolm McLaren, we knew that Trevor Horn was a very good or fantastic producer.
Yeah.
And being touched by his hand would mean something.
Well, the thing is, you knew who Trevor Horn was. I had no idea who Trevor Horn was when I met him. Ralf introduced me to, I was in the classical music scene. I really didn't listen to much pop music at the time. So I had no idea who Trevor Horn is.
Which might have been an advantage, because then you're not shell-shocked.
Sure. And then, so I think when you brought the demo, and I think I read somewhere that the demo that you brought together at the beginning was called, I don't know, maybe a different Discipline. I don't know the name.
It was not a demo. You know, that was a song we recorded in Germany in '82. Yeah. And because I had records out before in Germany, and there was interest for this stuff in England, there was already an English record company, a small alternative independent company, who wanted to release it. So actually, unless this guy from the New Musical Express, that his name was Chris Bohn, a colleague of Paul Morley, he said to us, stop, don't do a release with this other label, wait for Trevor Horn and Paul Morley to listen to this tape. But it was not really a demo. It was not supposed to go to Trevor Horn. It was supposed to be released already on an independent label in England.
Got it. I got it. So you arrived to Sound Studios in London, right? And there was Paul Morley and Paul. I read somewhere that Paul liked what they brought in, either the demo or Dr. Mabuse early version at the time, and then decided with Trevor Horn, okay, let's go for it. Let's try to help these guys, right?
Yeah, I think Paul Morley probably was most excited about the name, I think.
I got it, yeah.
And he got the concept. I mean, Ralph's idea, have this German band with the name Propaganda, and the kind of strict type of music, dark, theme-orientated concept album, that kind of thing he was talking about. And I think that resonated well with Paul Morley. I guess so,
And also, I think Düsseldorf played a major part, because Trevor Horn is a big Kraftwerk fan. And you might recall in the very beginning, when ZTT started, they only mentioned Frankie Goes to Hollywood and us in connection with the cities. That means Frankie Goes to Hollywood coming from Liverpool, hinting at the Beatles, and Propaganda from Düsseldorf, hinting at Kraftwerk. So that played a big role as well.
Yeah. How you guys arrived with the name Propaganda to begin with? Whose idea was that?
Well, actually, I had a song. We used to be in a band before, and I actually had written a song that was called Propaganda, but was never released. And from that song, I thought it would be a good name at that time for a project. So I didn't at the moment think it would become big, but when we then had this connection with ZTT, we thought a name like Propaganda would look very interesting if it's in the charts you see something like propaganda between some pop acts, people will hesitate, think about it, and probably listen. Why are they called propaganda? What is it all about? But in the very beginning, it was more like a good underground name.
I got it. Yeah. And it became, it's a catchy name, right? The same name exists in Spanish, exists in English. So it wasn't a German, weird German combination of words that people couldn't pronounce. It's like Germany. So it was like, man, very clever, very smart.
The word propaganda is globally understood. There is no translation.
That's right.
Wow. I remember we were in Spain and there was an interview when we were successful. We were all over Europe, went to radio stations for radio interviews. We did loads of TV shows. And one interviewer asked us, why did you choose a Spanish name for your band? And we were surprised, because then we realized, of course, it's the same name. He thought it's a Spanish name. It isn't, it is. It's probably the same name,
Yeah.
So that worked.
Gotcha. So let's forward like a year after that. So this, they end up releasing this, The Secret, which this is the first one that I want to sample. And of course, getting to here, we'll talk a lot about that. It's a lot of it was a lot of work and painful work. You guys signed a contract, you didn't know what you were signing, you didn't make any money. Some of you were. Claudia then get married, living in London. You guys were living in Germany. It was a lot of work. How you end up meeting Steven Lipson, for example, right? So Steven at the time was working for Trevor, so he was already in the Sarman studio, right?
He was in Sarman
engineer. He was engineer.
Steven Lipson was engineering Dr. Mabuse. He was the engineer for Trevor. Trevor Horn was a producer, and Steven Lipson was the engineer. And what happened was our contract said that the entire album will be produced by Trevor Horn. So Trevor Horn did Dr. Mabuse, but he also did Relax with Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And what happened was that Relax went through the roof, was so extremely successful on a global scale that Trevor was forced to do the Frankie Goes to Hollywood album, and was kind of talking to us and said, look, there's nothing I can do about this. Can we find another solution? And then eventually came up with the idea, how about working with Steven Lipson as a producer at Sam Studios, while Trevor is around all the time, basically, and he can monitor what is happening in the studio. He can monitor the direction and give Steven Lipson kind of an oversight in terms of the direction of the album and what should be done and what shouldn't be done. And that is basically what happened. It was like Steven Lipson did the rest of the album, but Trevor Horn was
supervising everything. Yeah,
he was supervising.
Yeah.
He was.
That's the right word.
Yeah.
And then at the beginning, so before I forget, so Susanne knew Claudia from the band that were together in Düsseldorf. I think it's called Topolinos or something, right? So
no.
Wrong name.
No, I'm wrong.
No, it's. I think you couldn't really call it a band.
A duo.
I think they had a sort. It was sort of a party thing. They had a song out on a German or Düsseldorf local label, a sampler. There you will find one track, but I think they only played live for. I think on a party they once played live for something like 20 minutes. It was like 4 girls. Who were actually friends of guys who were in a band or in bands.
I got it.
So it was a bit like a party thing. And the name was Topolinos.
Okay.
And Topolino is, I think, an Italian or Spanish name for Mickey Mouse.
Correct. Yeah.
But I wouldn't really. The impression is one to call it a band within the context of the Düsseldorf scene. I think they only played at this party once.
Got it, right. So perfect. Got it. Thank you for the clarification.
Is that how
So-
you met?
No, I actually, because maybe that's something, I knew Claudia not from the music, but I knew her from, let's say, from the clubs.
I got it. Yeah.
So when Claudia came in, it was not really a decision based on her singing. And the other thing that is something that nowadays I shouldn't really say, on this discipline track, we used the vocals, the voice from Susanne. And actually, a big role was the image we wanted to create in the very beginning of Propaganda. So she was a bit chosen because she resembled for me, she was resembling a German actor from the 20s. The look of her. So that was the main reason at the beginning that was a lucky reason why we started to work with her in the studio. And at that time, this Topolinos thing I didn't know about.
Yeah.
And in Düsseldorf, Düsseldorf, we had a center, a club where the new music happened starting in around 77 or 78. You had a lot of bands starting. A lot of these bands got records out, got even careers out of music. And I was coming from this background, but that was later on very much used to describe Düsseldorf. But not everybody who was in Düsseldorf was part of the scene.
I see. And then,
Just for you to remind, I was, when I saw Susanne the first time, I saw Greta Garbo, if you know the name.
Yeah,
Greta
of course,
Garbo
yeah.
was this actor.
Yeah.
And I think she in fact was Scandinavian, but played a big role in German movies in the 20s. One was Die Freudlose Gasse, which means translated joyless lane. And maybe that reminds me of P Machinery.
Got it. Oh, wow.
Joyless
Oh,
lanes
that's
we
great.
walk.
Wow. I didn't know that.
We walk in line.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then, so Claudia arrived there and became part of the group. When you knew that she could sing as well at the time, early at the beginning?
Susanne knew that because when we had a meeting in the very, very early times with Paul Morley in Düsseldorf, Susanne chose to bring Claudia with her because she knew that Claudia had a more of a singing voice.
Yeah, right.
So maybe you could say Susanne introduced Claudia to the band at that time.
Yeah.
Then the first time we went to London to do some, in this case, real demos, we had Claudia with us. And that was when we also started to have a very early version of Dr. Mabuse.
Yep.
Which at the beginning we worked in Düsseldorf at Michael's little studio. We started to work on this Mabuse to then make it bigger in London in the studio with Claudia singing.
Man, that's great.
When I got introduced to Claudia, we did some practice hours together. I remember now. I still had access to the music school and everything, So went to a place where I had a grand piano, and I was playing songs like Summertime, and she was singing, I was accompanying her, and then you found out, well, she can sing, It's like, she enjoyed that a lot, she didn't do that before. And that was fun, I remember. That was before everything happened.
Got it. Wow. What a beautiful story. At the time, Steven ended up using different machine, right? I think it's called the synclavier. It's a digital sampling instrument, to create the sound of the band, right? But he realized at the beginning, well, I can play a little bit with the machine, synchronize 2 or 3 machines, but I need some lyrics and chords and a vision to do this project, right? And how difficult was for you guys to come up with lyrics and some chords that could be used in the synclavier machine that Lipso was programming. I think there were three machines that needed to be coordinated at the time. What was the difficulty of doing that? So
the song structures were basically laid out, or the song structure for Mabuse, Dr. Mabuse, was laid out. Dr. Mabuse was laid out on a 4-track cassette recorder in Düsseldorf.
Yeah.
And Ralf was writing the lyrics. He wrote all the lyrics for the song.
Yeah.
So the lyrics were there, and then I was working on some ideas, and then Ralf came in and said, well, this is good, or maybe try something else here, whatever. And we developed the kind of structure of Dr. Mabuse, like the basic compositional structure of it. The middle, have the verses, then have a middle part, and then eventually have an end part too, some stuff like that. And that was on a very basic level. But that was then, later on, once we had Dr. Mabuse out, and it worked as it was a hit single for us, we could afford a small digital system, comparatively small. It was still a big system, which was a PPG system and a Lindrum computer, where we could sit in Düsseldorf in our little studio, and I could program the other tracks in a basic structural form, right? I had the verse parts, the chorus parts, not all complete, but let's say the skeleton of the record you hold in your hands has been done that way. Then I went to London. We already had the record deal. Then I went to London, and there was an assistant. I put all the programming from the PPG system that was synced to a tape recorder, analog tape recorder, and I put down all the basic ideas for each track onto analog machines. And then from that point on, the team of ZTT took over, in a sense, because then they had a framework they could work with, and basically embellish and make it into what it finally became. And I have to say, I was myself blown away by the possibilities and the ability they had. I mean, they brought in a guy called Andy Richards, who is a very versatile keyboard player and programmer, and he was very good at synth sounds. And they also brought in a guy called JJ, who was a Fairlight programmer for Trevor Horn in the group Art of Noise.
Got it. Yeah.
So there were a lot of people who were kind of employed to work on our material and refine it more and more and more. Eventually, like on Dr. Mabuse, there was even a real orchestra coming in. I met the
Was Bedford?
David Bedford. I met David Bedford. Trevor Horn introduced me, and he was the arranger for the orchestral part of Dr. Mabuse.
Yeah.
And it was nice to talk to him, and then we shared some ideas. I gave him some little scripts of little motifs I would like to see in an arrangement, because I couldn't do an entire orchestral arrangement like he was a very good orchestra. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. And he actually incorporated those little things, which made me very happy. It was very good. You have some basic motifs, and then he brought it into the big orchestral score, and it was amazing for me. I mean, obviously there was a lot of refinement and embellishment and production, which I could have never imagined at the time, because it was the first time I was in the studio was when we did Dr. Mabuse. I've never been in a studio before. I didn't know how to work this kind of thing, But the interesting thing was, I think for ZTT, Ralf's concept was, this is a band which is entirely based on electronic instruments. So he came over with his machines, basic machines, at the very beginning. I mean, not too basic. There was an ARP, I think you had, and and a drum, 808 bass drum, and some bass lines he was composing. But there was no drummer, there was no guitar player, no bass player, no keyboard player, something like that. It was just basically the idea, okay, we do everything with machines.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. Of course, later there were many people invited to play instruments, real instruments on the record.
Sure.
But the entire compositional, I mean, not that we could have done the record, it finally came out. However, still, the basic compositional structure of what A Secret Wish became, has been built around our ideas. I mean, Ralph's lyrics and the way I wrote the music,
Oh, absolutely. By the way, you still do you have those tapes somewhere at home? The Reno stuff?
Well, actually, there's been a
It'll
lot
be
of
good to one day.
changes.
If I end up
I
going
don't-
to Germany, I'm going to visit you, and I would like to see them.
I should have. I think I still have some cassettes in the cellar. I don't know.
Oh,
But they were,
man.
I don't, to tell you the truth, I don't have I don't have all the tapes anymore because I had a little Fostex 4-track machine, which I was bouncing. I could bounce, and I was like putting the demos together and remembered, okay, what is this part, and then try to get a song together, and it worked. But I don't have those machines anymore. The technology has changed. Once the PPG with the programmable sequencer came out, that was the next medium where you wrote everything. That's where everything happened. But I don't have that machine anymore. I sold the PPG because eventually I sold it around 2006 or 7, right? Because it was sitting in my studio, and I thought every time I turned it on, I thought the machine was the computer, the hard drive was busy and trying to access the floppy disk. And I thought, oh, it's gonna make it maybe one more time, maybe, So it worked. But eventually it was too nerve-wracking. And I sold it to a guy in France who was a total fan of his machines, who also liked new propaganda. But I told him, I said, look, this machine is old. I cannot tell you how much time you have with it unless you are a capable technician. And actually, it wasn't that difficult because you can work on the floppy drive. You can change that. But I can't. I'm not that guy.
At this time in the early 80s, you had on the equipment side so many developments. Every 2 years, a new state-of-the-art machine would come out, and we were very lucky that ZTT was part of a studio, ZAM, Trevor Horn studio ZAM, and they had all this state-of-the-art equipment. And for example, you mentioned Synclavier. That came a bit later when we did Dr. Mabuse. You could say that was a Fairlight record, because at that time the Fairlight was state-of-the-art. And for these machines, you needed people, more or less, who may had a education on the instrument, taking months sometimes to learn the instrument by heart. And that with the Fairlight was JJ, who also was member of Art of Noise, which was a big help because Trevor Horn knew what kind of sound potential was in the Fairlight that JJ was operating. And then with a gap of over a year, the Synclavier came up. And at that time, the Synclavier was taking more or less over from the Fairlight. And a lot of programming was done by the engineer, or in that case by Lipson, because these were instruments that cost as much as a house. And we wouldn't have had the time to learn these kind of instruments.
No.
They really cost like 6-digit figures at that time. And it was a big investment. Only a very few studios in the world at that time could do that. And we were very lucky that we were in one of the studios at that time.
Gotcha. Whose idea was to use Edgar Allan Poe in Dream Within a Dream? It was you guys?
What happened was I had this sequence I remember there was in some studios it was a complex with 3 different types of studios, and there was a kitchen, a TV area, all that stuff, and there was an apartment under the roof in that studio, and I was set up there with my PPG system, and I was working on this kind of choir changes, which worked over this pulse of what is the bass line of Dream is in a Dream. And I did this kind of interesting changes with augmented chords and all sorts of things, which I got inspired by this sound from the PPG system. And once I had that running, I had a few nice changes going. I was recording that into the sequencer. All of a sudden, Trevor Horn came up the stairs and said, "What is this? What is this?" And he was like, he really liked it, but it didn't have any structure in terms of a 3-minute song. So it was just a kind of soundscape type of thing, very hypnotic, with the bass line being a pulse on C all the time, all the way through all the changes. And he really liked it. He got it immediately. And I think Paul Morley came in and mentioned how we would feel about using an Edgar Allan Poe poem,
Yep.
I think pretty much that was what happened. No?
That was Paul Morley. Yeah,
I think it was
Morley.
Paul Morley's idea.
Mhm.
And then Susanne, that track took a long time to do. It went through various phases, and I remember Andy Richards helped me with the expansion of the chords, so we had more like an intro part, and we did like Stephen played the bass live instead of my programmed rigid program thing. It has a better flow when you play it on a real bass. And but it worked very, very well. For the trumpet part, there was a guy that was in the Düsseldorf Symphonic Orchestra. I had many, of course, all my colleagues, and there was a guy, Alan Kirkendale. He's a principal trumpet player American guy, principal trumpet player from the Düsseldorf Symphonic Orchestra at the time. And I asked him, I said, "Alan, look, I'm doing this record, as you may have heard in England, and there's a trumpet part. There's a part that could be played on a trumpet really well. Would you come over and play it?" So he came over to London. He was invited by the record company, and he played. He has a classical approach, not a jazz approach, And he played the trumpet part very beautifully. He played it. Everybody was blown away. I remember Steve Lipson also, like, wow, this guy has a different tone, to it. Like, it's a classical type of playing, approach of delivering a melody, So that worked very well.
Yeah, let's talk about so for the track, if I remember correctly, from Duel, right? There was another piece, one of my favorite, but they end up, I think once the album was released, reached at the top of the pops in June of that year, and the percussion were provided by Stuart Copeland, that became later on the member of the Police, was the drummer, right? So,
yes. What happened? We were in the studio, and Trevor he wasn't happy with this. I think it was sampled and programmed before, right? The drums.
Yeah.
And he wasn't happy with the drum sounds, and he said he wanted to bring in a drummer, and he had Stuart Copeland, so he invited Stuart Copeland to come to the studio and play to this track, to Duel, to the backing. It was already pretty far, the production. It was pretty, and Stuart Copeland came in, and it was quite amazing, because there was also such an eye opener, you could say, if you want, because Stuart Copeland, there was a drum set, right? He set it up. I think it was even a hired drum. I don't know if it was his They hired a kid in, and then he came and played. But he tuned the drum set, sat down, and the first beat he was making, I mean, if you close your eyes and somebody would ask who's drumming, you would immediately know that's Stuart Copeland, you know. I mean, it's like, I mean, it was his musical handwriting is so distinct, you could immediately know, okay, this is Stuart Copeland, you know. So, and that was when the synclavier came in, and then Stephen put stuff in the synclavier, parts of it, and manipulated things electronically. But we had the sound of Stuart Copeland, which is on the record, which made the distinct difference.
Absolutely, yeah. And then Steve Howe playing the track number 2, I think it's Murder of Love, right? Man,
he played Murder of Love, and he played on the 12-inch of P Machinery. He played the solo there.
No.
Doch, das ist Steve Howe.
Nee, das ist schon McClough.
Nein, das ist der Beta-Mix.
Ja. Also du meinst einen anderen.
Den polished mix. Steve Howe was playing on the polished version of the 12-inch of P Machinery. I did a vibraphone solo, and Steve Howe did a. So I felt proud. I said, "Well, okay, I'm soloing with Steve Howe." You know.
Yeah, wow.
that was nice. You know, it was big.
P Machinery also is a great track too. All of them, man. I mean, then within the Murder of Love, You Will, Duel, Frozen Face, P Machinery, Sorry for Laughing, The Chase, and Dr. Mabuse. Yeah, it's man, what day. Some days I look back in life and. Man, all these big names. I mean, your album, you know, Secret Witch is, and I have a lot of music, one of my top 50s. I have listened to album, and as I told you, I have many versions, at least 200 times. And every time I listen in the car, right, or here in the house or with the headphone, I discover more detail because every of the track has many layers. Like a cake,
it does have many layers. Yes,
you know, and I think where the machine, where the drums can be, and the keyboard, you know, and this and that, and I like the track. It's amazing the number of people, and of course, also as well, you know, David Sylvian played the keyboard in P Machinery, right, as well. So
no, he did. He came up with a little motive in the verses. He played some guitar.
On the guitar, okay, got it.
And he did some, I think he did some synths on the verses of the machine. That's right.
Yeah.
He developed a little motive in the verses. And yes, he came in, I remember him. He was a nice guy, very nice guy. Very
yeah, and all of them, right? The Steve Howe became very famous. Stuart Copeland became very famous, David Sylvian, and you guys, of course. So who was keeping? And they were all right. That's right. Who was keeping track of the cost? Because bringing new people, expanding, staying. Hey, you guys were not paying. No problem. Bring this guy. No problem. Bring that guy. No problem. And they would take an accountant. How we would have recovered the money.
Yeah. Now I guess that the people you mentioned, they actually didn't really charge for that. They were friends or acquaintances of Trevor Horn. They liked the music and to contribute. And you have to admit, they were rich already, or most of them, just for playing a couple of minutes on the German band's music. They wouldn't charge.
Oh, they would charge, but they charge such a nominal fee.
But it's not really like if a German record company would try to get somebody like Stuart Copeland, they would be charged, but not Trevor Horn in that way.
Got it.
But what really was a bit, there was no cost control on everything else. That means there was really not a cost control on how many hours were spent on some sampling of, let's say, Claudia's voice or so. That was a bit of a problem that we didn't have a management at that time who was looking at that. But on the other hand, this unlimited access to the instruments and to the musicians was what made the album special. because with strict cost control, somebody coming in and saying you had now 8 hours in the studio, it's getting too expensive.